Welcome to another Score Sheet podcast. Today I'm very happy to say that we have a guy I've known for many years, Joe Sheehan. Joe has been around the baseball world for decades now. He helped start Baseball Prospectus, he's written for places like ESPN. He's now got occasional articles out with Sports Illustrated. He's doing a regular contribution with Baseball America. And then my favorite thing is he started his newsletter a few years ago where he talks about real baseball quite a bit, and then fantasy some. But if you're a baseball fan, Joe Sheehan's newsletter is a great way to start the day when it pops up in your email box a couple, 3, 4, 5 times a week. How are you, Joe?
Good, Jeff. Good to talk to you. I'm glad you restarted the podcast. I've been looking forward to coming on with you about talk a little baseball.
Yeah. No, you and I could probably talk for 3 hours right now, but we'll try to keep it down to a more manageable 15 minutes for people. But yeah, it's always good talking to you. You're a Yankee fan, but I try to overlook that. I liked your newsletter a few days ago where you addressed the fact people call you a bet hater.
Yeah, well, I've picked on the Mets over the years because of the ownership situation. They got the taxpayer-funded ballpark in 2009, and of course the Bernie Madoff scandal affected their finances. And they've been a large market team running their team like a small market team. And when you do that after getting $800 million from the taxpayers, it feels a little fraudulent. So they spent money, and I've kind of eased off on them a little bit, but. Yeah, there are a lot of people who they've been a soft target, and I've taken my share of shots. But I think they're one of the more interesting teams this year. But I don't really hate being a fan. I don't know how you experience this as you've gotten older, but between baseball being the day job and I think the Yankees' success over that 96 to 2009 period softened it a little bit, and just focusing on other things. I probably root harder for arena gymnastics now than I do at any Yankee game.
Yeah, well, being a Yankee fan, I read a stat the other day I thought had to be wrong. They haven't finished under 500 in 25 straight years. Is that right?
Yeah, I want to say 1991 or 1992 would have been. Yeah, it was the Buck Showalter years coming out of the summer. There was a really bad stretch from like 89 to 91. They were terrible. And then Showalter took over as manager. Steinbrenner got suspended, and everything got good starting in 1994. So they were supposed to. I think I picked them to finish under 500 2 of the last 3 or 4 years, and it hasn't happened. They've just had better bullpens, and Joe Girardi's done a really good job. I think this year the talent is better than they've had in recent seasons. But one of the biggest stories of the year, I think, is going to be Aaron Boone replacing Joe Girardi. Joe Girardi was a very strong dugout manager, and they've gone to a guy who, we just don't know a whole lot about at this point in Aaron Boone. So I think we expect them to battle the Red Sox for supremacy. But if you look at the dugout, I feel like the Red Sox have probably upgraded the dugout where I'm not completely sure the Yankees have.
Yeah, but 25 years, I mean, that's, you would think 1 year you'd lose a couple starting pitchers to injury or something. It's just because they did have some years where they weren't picked to finish great. But that means you're in the pennant race with the wild card era now. If you're 500 on August 1st, then your fans have something to pay attention for.
If you're 55 and 65 on August 1st, you're telling your fans they have something to pay attention for. It's really remarkable. Like I said, they went through this really fallow period where they just never fell under 500. And it looks like now, of course, with, you look at the Stanton trade, you look at some of the young talent coming through the system like Frazier and Gleyber Torres and Esteban Florial behind that. It does look like they're going to now go into another long stretch where they're expected not just to be over 500, but to compete for championships. So it's starting to look a little bit like the mid-century period where from, 21 to 64, the Yankees won like half of the available AL pennants. Not as much fun for everybody else, of course, and I think it affects the development plans. If you're the Orioles or the Rays or the Jays, it affects the decisions that you have to make. Whereas I think some of the Cubs in the Central are going to be like this now. The Dodgers, as you know, in the NL West, where you've got a team that has incredible revenues and a large market and is also now one of the better run organizations in the game. That's a tough thing to compete with.
Yeah, no, as a Giants fan, the Dodgers are definitely the evil empire in my mind. But it seems almost in baseball you've really got a huge separation. Houston, the Cubs, the Dodgers, it's hard to just not see them being right at the top for the next few years, and at the top by such a large margin, it's almost hard to imagine beating them out for a division.
Well, I think we'll look at this year as where everybody expects the 5 division winners to repeat, and then the Yankees and the Red Sox to finish 1-2, with the second team getting the top wild card in some order. And last year I think everybody picked the six division winners correctly as well. You mentioned the Astros, the Cubs, and I think that you look what the Giants have done. You look what the Cardinals and the Brewers have done. You look at the Angels, with Mike Trout, and all of these teams. It feels like as much as they're improving and they're trying to get there, they're all fighting for wild card slots. And it's interesting because the wild card just isn't as valuable as it once was. We've got 2 wild card slots now, but effectively all it is a play-in game into the main bracket. So the being the 4th best team in the league is less valuable than that's ever been, since 1993, I guess. It's interesting. I think one of the reasons we're seeing some of these other teams not compete is because the wild card just isn't as valuable as it once was. Yeah, we had the 2014 World Series with the Royals and the Giants, with both wild card teams, but you just really can't go all out if your upside is the wild card. And because of the Astros, the Cubs, these dominant teams, it's really hard if you're the Giants. I mentioned in the newsletter the other day, I can make the case for the Giants signing Jake Arrieta, but it's only going to move them from 84, 85 to 88, 89 wins. It still doesn't put them within 5 games of the Dodgers, and it incurs the luxury tax penalties and the repeater penalties. So if you're the Giants, you want to spend that money, or do you want to see where you are on July 1st?
Yeah, no, I agree. It's you started calling it the coin flip game from the day they announced the new 2 wild card setup. I mean, it's in the NFL, you win a wild card, your fans are excited because you have as much chances going on as anybody else, except for the talent difference. But yeah, in baseball, one game between 2 teams is pretty much exactly 50-50.
Yeah, and it's frustrating if you look at the Pirates, who ran into Jake Arrieta at his peak and Madison Bumgarner at his peak in consecutive seasons. Yeah, they won the one year where they played Cueto, but I mean, when they get shut out in consecutive years by 2 of the best pitchers in the game at their peak, Arrieta won the Cy Young Award that year, and I think Bumgarner was one of the top guys. So it's it's very much a hard thing to shoot for. And like I say, maybe if you're the Twins and you weren't expecting to win and you made the playoffs and you got to play the Yankees because somebody had to be the 5th best team in the league, maybe that's a successful season. But I think if you're the Giants or the Cardinals or a team that has designs on greater successes, a 3-hour playoff trip just really doesn't get it done.
No, it's one game, which, like I said, in football, one game you remember, but in baseball, It's just the 163rd game. It's and then you got teams like Houston that just, I don't know, tanking is kind of a rough word, but they just gave up for 2 or 3 years. They built a great farm system, and now they got the reward where anything can happen. You can have injuries or down years, but they certainly look like they're going to be in the mix for many years to come with just an awesome group of young players.
You look at the contrast between the 2010, 12, 14 Giants, which were more traditionally built. They just hit on a ton of first-round picks. Lincecum, Bumgarner, Posey, Belton Crawford further down in the draft, and they formed this core, Sandoval internationally. But they never really intentionally were bad. Then you had a CBA, the 2012 CBA, that encouraged teams to be bad, that basically increased the rewards for being bad. And you ended up with the Cubs and you ended up with the Astros. The worst thing that could have happened to baseball was for the Astros and the Cubs to win consecutive World Series. So now you essentially have proof of concept, right?
Yeah.
You get really bad, trade your guys for the next Jake Arrieta, and find your Jose Altuve, draft your Carlos Correa, and in 5 years you'll be back in the World Series. Now it doesn't always work that way. It probably doesn't work that way for most teams, but I think that if you're trying to sell this to your fans, you can now point to the last 2 dog piles and say, those guys did it this way, trust us. And the thing about it is the short-term profits are there no matter what. And I've written about this a lot this winter, not just revenue sharing, the local revenue sharing, but the national revenues have gotten to a point where teams can say, we don't have to care who watches us or shows up at the ballpark this year, because we're going to make a profit, especially if our payroll is 50, 60, 70 million dollars. We make enough money nationally and through local revenue sharing in a small market to say we can trade away Stanton, Ozuna, Yelich, and still make money. And that's problem for baseball. And that's where I think we talked about possibly a payroll floor. I'm not sure that works in baseball because of the structure of the salaries, but I think eventually MLB and the MLBPA have to sit down and say, how do we how do we set up a pay structure so that the players who are producing get more of the money, and that, the incentive for these teams to basically not pay anybody for 3 years but make a profit is reduced.
Yeah. No, I think it's a problem that these guys are in their third year. They're really contributing to their team, and they're making, well, it's still a lot of money for the, way more money than you or I make.
But about the baseball economy here. We got to be, we can't get, it's not what a welder makes. We're dealing within the baseball economy.
Right. And comparatively, you got some guy that just because he's been in the majors 8 years is making $10 million, and some guy that's putting up twice as much value as far as winning games is making $1 million. It does seem, I think that whole 6 years under team control has to be addressed, and because players are coming up now and they're producing right away and they're making all-star teams right away.
Well, one of the biggest differences between now and when I started doing this is teams have simply stopped paying for service time. We talked for years, and I said this a long time ago. I said, when there were all the labor issues in the 1990s, and people would say, well, you guys at Prospectus, you guys are just all pro player. I said, because the players don't lie. No player has ever said to me, well, I just made $17.50 an hour this year, the way the owners will lie about their finances. However, a league or teams or an industry and an economy run by Prospectus type guys, which is what we have now, would be terrible for players, because the metrics are going to show that there's no need to pay for service time. You're seeing a lot of complaining now. I think it was Neil Walker, and forgive me if it wasn't Neil Walker, but I think it was Neil Walker who basically said, guys like me bring something to the table other than our performance. We bring leadership and veteranosity and all that. And I think fundamentally the industry has rejected that argument now. The industry has said production is what matters. There are still a lot of people that will pay lip service to the idea of veterans and chemistry and all that. I believe that there are people who do still believe all that, but they're not paying for it. The market is dictating this. So the market is saying, I can pay Neil Walker $12 million, or I can pay this, bring somebody up and pay him $500,000, and then next year $550,000, and the next year $750,000, and then finally he gets to arbitration. But I've gotten all of these cheap years from him. So to me, the big solution has always been a much higher minimum salary, and then beyond that, something where teams, and this fixes a couple of problems. Once you're promoted to the major leagues, you get paid the major league minimum salary for the rest of the year. Let's say it's $1 million. Once you're promoted, you get that. I think that would do a couple things. One, it would change roster churn. Teams would have to think a little more about this constant churn at the back of the roster, which has contributed to things like the 8-man bullpen and the faceless relievers just throwing 96 and a lot of the things that are, I think, negative about the game. But mostly it would get more money into the hands of the players, and it would change the equation between calling up a prospect and hiring a veteran. I think that right now the difference in price between your 6-year major league free agents and your no service time rookie is so large, you play the rookie. If we can reduce that a little bit, I think it would help the veterans a bit. But, we're never going back to 1978. We're never going back to Wayne Garland getting a 10-year deal. We're never going back to Gary Matthews Jr. getting 5 and whatever he got off his career year. I believe those days are completely gone. You're not going to see Michael Tucker get signed so that the Giants don't have to use a first-round draft pick.
No, I think you're right. The game has changed. I mean, things change in the world. But, as a fan, when I go to a baseball game, I like seeing young guys come up, and it's fun to watch them. But I kind of like watching someone like Neil Walker that I followed for 10 years come up. It feels more like I'm at a major league game than I'm at a spring training game. If there's guys on the field that, the guy I'm with has actually heard of.
Well, it's one thing to actually play prospects, and it's another thing just to play the guy because he's cheaper than the other guy. And I think that's one of the arguments that the veterans are making, which is to say, Neil Walker is fundamentally a better baseball player than 8, 9, 10 of the starting second basemen in Major League Baseball. Probably more than that. I'm just picking out numbers here. But those teams have simply no motivation to add the 2 to 3 marginal wins that Walker is going to have. The Padres, the Marlins, the Braves to some extent, although I think the Braves have some sleeper potential. The Rays have now kind of checked out of the year. You look at the Tigers rebuilding, the Royals. Walker would help all of these teams. but these teams don't have any reason to care about adding 2 to 3 wins. And that is, to some extent, the analytics influence. We were the first guys to say, or among the first guys to say, there's no difference between winning 67 games and 70 games.
Right.
So once you know you're going to win, you're not going to make the playoffs, you may as well be as bad as possible. There are radical solutions to this involving changing the draft order. One of the things I think that you could go to is, affecting fundamentally, if you lose for too long and you're a revenue sharing recipient, we got to start taking away your money. If you've got a low payroll and you're not winning, you don't get access to that money. You can succeed and get access to that money. You can pay players and get access to it, but you can't do what the Astros did. And the Astros were a large market team. That's probably a bad example. But you can't do what the Marlins are about to do. You can't do what the Padres are doing. You only get access to revenue sharing if you've shown that you're either going to spend it or you're succeeding without having to spend it. I don't want to penalize teams for winning. If you win, if you're the Padres and you win 85 games on a $55 million payroll, I don't want to take away your revenue sharing. But if you're winning 65 games a year on a $55 million payroll, I think you lose access to that money.
Yeah. No, in all sports, there were those years the NFL had parity. It was kind of fun. When you watched a game, you weren't expecting the game to be over by the end of the first quarter because the teams were somewhat close. But, yeah, there's some teams right now, they're going to lose 90-some games, and the chance of them not losing 90 games is pretty slim, like the 4 or 5 or 6 teams you mentioned. They're going to be out of the race as far as their fans are concerned 2 days after opening day.
And that's the frustrating thing about this winter, where it used to be you'd go to the winter and you would try to sign guys and make trades and promote your team in a way that said, hey, buy tickets, get excited. We're gonna bring in this guy and we're going to get better next year. And there are 10 teams that just didn't bother. And some of this is the sophistication of the fan base. You can sell this to the fan base now. And again, as I said, point to the Astros and Cubs and say, well, they won the World Series doing this, and everybody wants to be the next Astros and Cubs. But it does change the nature of the winter. The winter is no longer about getting people excited about your team. It's something – sinister is not the word. Just something less exciting, something less what sports is supposed to be about. And I think baseball's got it better than these other. I mean, the NBA has 4 legitimate title contenders. The NFL had 4 legitimate title contenders. Yeah. I mean, MLB's got more than that. But it's funny, and I've made this point before. You know that I'm generally more of a free markets guy when it comes to this stuff. I think that there should be – we talk about revenue sharing and all these superstructures, and I think the best system is to say, go spend the money you have. These guys are all billionaires or billion-dollar companies in the case of like the group that owns the Braves. And the best system is simply to say everybody has their own resources. Go compete for talent. Go compete for wins. And the Bud Selig era kind of taught everybody, well, no, these small market teams have to be helped. But if you look at it, the best era for small market teams was the 1980s when we had free agency and minimal revenue sharing. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't have revenue sharing now because the differences in local markets are massive. And you do have to find some way for the Yankees and the Dodgers to not simply spend every dollar they have and have $500 million payrolls, because competition, that you would actually have that. But I also think that, and this is where people get very mad at me, but we also have teams in play. We have to decide, are we going to continue to support teams in places that maybe have teams because they were metropolises 100 years ago? I don't like the idea of messing with original franchises, but at what point does it become very difficult for a team in Pittsburgh or Cincinnati or Milwaukee or Kansas City to compete in a league with teams in New York and Los Angeles and Chicago? And again, this is probably more a generational problem. Yeah. This is a long-term existential problem. I don't say go ahead.
Those teams can compete just because, as you said, of the national revenues. I mean, that's what the NFL does. The NFL just takes that huge national TV contract. Well, the money thing, yeah, we could talk about that. So I think the other thing you write about on a frequent basis, I guess, is maybe issues with the game itself. It's turned into a strikeout and home run league. And strikeouts are kind of fun when it's Tom Seaver. But when it's every single pitcher and every reliever you've never even heard of is striking out 1.3 guys per inning, to me it's more fun to watch a grounder to third base and the guy make a good play and throw someone out at first on a bang-bang play than it is to watch some reliever come in and strike out 2 guys in a row, and then another reliever comes in and strikes out 2 guys. I like to see the bat on the ball.
Right. And the initial structure of baseball 150 years ago was more like softball, where the pitcher puts the ball into play, the batter hits it, and then all the action happens. And over time and accelerating over the last 20 years or so, it's become more of a batter pitcher strikeout, three true outcomes term. I think Dave Peace was the first person to come up with that, my old Prospectus colleague. Strikeouts, walks, and homers. Strikeout, walks, and homers are more right around a third of outcomes now. And baseball wasn't ever designed for that. And I agree with you. If you're Justin Verlander striking out 15 guys in 7 innings is exciting.
Yeah.
But random pitcher X.
Yeah, Hunter Strickland's striking out 2 guys because he's only going to pitch to 3 batters a game.
Right. We've learned that the less work we give pitchers, the easier it is for them to do that. And that's how you end up with 12 and 13-man pitching staffs and relievers averaging 1 inning. And as you say, 1.3 strikeouts an inning. And I don't think it's particularly entertaining brand of baseball. Now, some of that is our age. Ben Lindbergh, who was at Prospectus for a little while. Now he does great work for The Ringer. He and I have talked about this, and I've heard him talk about it with Jeff Sullivan on his podcast, and he seems to not mind the strikeout. I think some of that is a generational thing because he doesn't remember baseball when it was more of a ball in play, run the bases, play defense game. I think that you have to almost be of a certain age to remember when baseball wasn't a 3 true outcome game. And I also think some of it is there's a generation, particularly of stat heads, who've come of age in the pitch framing era. So a lot of the excitement of the game is watching pitch framing and figuring out what catchers can do this. And that's kind of a side discussion. But I do think that baseball wasn't designed to be a game where the ball was out of play as much as it is now. And you talk about your grounders to third base. We don't see as many great plays anymore, I think, because because of shifting, because of the ability to position defenses where the ball is going to go, we've reduced the importance of range. Right? Yeah. I mean, think about it. Defense is almost a team thing now, where you've got 7 guys and you're going to position them where the ball is going to go. In the same way a football team would put its 11 guys where the football is most likely to go. So that grounder to third base, well, it might have been a great play 10 years ago, but now the third baseman or possibly the shortstop is exactly where he needs to be to make that play.
Yeah. No, I mean, I like. Well, forever it's been said, the most exciting thing in sports is watching a guy hit a triple. And there's all that strategy. You get a guy on first base, and if you think the next guy's going to hit a home run, you just kind of stand there at first base and wait for him to hit a home run. But it used to be we talked about, well, they're going to put a hit and run on. Is he going to steal? What's the defense going to do to stop him from getting to second? I don't know really how you address it. You can't tell pitchers to not throw as hard. I guess you could put a limit. If teams only had 10 pitchers on their squad, then they couldn't pitch 6 different pitchers every game.
Yeah, 11's the number that I've been using. Max of 11 pitchers. Then teams would have to select for endurance as much as they select for velocity, and I think that would change the strategy. But as you say, you can't. And this ties into the whole pace of play and length of game discussion because it simply takes longer to play this type of game. There are people who want baseball games to be 2 hours and 30 minutes. My response is, okay, then you're going to have to cap player heights, player weights, and pitcher velocity. Because you want the game to be played the way it was played in 1977. When everybody was 5'7", 190, and well, that's me actually. Everybody was 5'7", 160, and the pitchers threw. Somebody who threw 90 was a big deal. Everybody throws 90 now. The average major league fastball is over 92 miles per hour. Yeah. If you had a guy who threw 92 25 years ago, you were really excited about him.
No, you had Bob Gibson.
Right. So there's. This is a generational existential. And when the things baseball's talking about, these visits to the mound, these aren't getting at the problem at all. And I think it's interesting because I think the evolution of the sport in football has made football more entertaining, right? Throwing the ball more. Yes, they've tweaked the rules. You can't go near a receiver, and maybe that should be different. But it's made football more fun to watch than when it was just pounding into the line, 2.5 yards at a time. Basketball, the valuing the 3-point shot, opening up the defense, opening up the lane, kind of the elimination of the mid-range has made the game more entertaining.
Yeah, no, I think sports have to learn. I mean, remember the NBA at one point, it was all isolation. Basically, the game was a series of one guy with the ball, one guy defending him, and the other 8 guys just kind of standing around wondering what was going to happen. And they've changed that game to where, you watch the Warriors the Warriors mainly, and it's exciting to watch. And there's other teams. Yeah, I think baseball, maybe limiting pitchers, because you can't tell pitchers not to throw as hard. But you have to let batters have a chance to maybe get some base hits. Folks, if you, we've only talked about a couple different things here, but Joe writes these newsletters a few times a week, talks about all sorts of things. He does team previews, and once the season gets going, Joe is maybe not a manager's best friend, because I think probably the most entertainment I get during the season is reading Joe's newsletters about what Ned Yost did wrong last night, or some other manager. Or occasionally, Joe, of course, says, hey, this guy made a great decision and look what it led to. So if you want to read that stuff, Joe's got a newsletter you can subscribe to. It costs about $3 a month. And how do they do that?
The best place to check it out is facebook.com, Sheehan newsletter, SHEEHAN, the word newsletter. There's actually a 10% discount through Facebook. So if you use the link there, you get 10% off. The newsletter is $34.95 a year. The discount will get you 10% off that. You also, I do a variety of things. We talked a lot about meta issues today, labor and the structure of the game. That's really become my focus over time. But, you mentioned I'm going through every team over the course of the offseason, kind of breaking down the roster and seeing what they're doing. In season, it's very newsy. What happened last night, what caught my eye. And it's very much a writing project, I would say, to differentiate between a lot of the work that's out there now, which is graphics and GIF-based. I'm a stat. I was one of the guys who helped start Prospectus, and I certainly have a stat head mindset. But I'm no longer on the bleeding edge of this stuff. So if you like to read, if the words matter, I think you'd really enjoy the writing in the newsletter. It's more of a writing project than necessarily a graphs and charts project.
Oh, your writing is phenomenal.
I appreciate
I say that not just because I know Joe, but if you like to read, and when you're done reading something you wish it wasn't over, Joe's newsletter does it. And he's also, he does talk about fantasy some. I know most of the people listening to this, of course, play fantasy like a lot of baseball fans. So you will get some nuggets of, boy, this guy is really looking good. And, here's some stats that show I think he's going to have a great month. So leading into that, do you have anybody that we're obviously in the middle of drafting season now, folks you're targeting, either well-known ones or lesser-known, whatever?
We did the score sheet mock draft project. You guys always set that up for us. I've been doing it now for about 7 years with Jay Youngclass, who's a newsletter subscriber, who asked me to join up with the team. And I love doing this project in the off season. Essentially, it's a 16-round mock draft, as if you're starting a league from scratch. So you have all of these decisions like, okay, are we going to draft a team for this year and focus on guys who might be older but are going to contribute, or are we going to be taking the
next great thing.
Exactly. And you see that throughout the first round where you're seeing the superstars in the game get picked, and then somebody will kind of pop up and say, okay, I'm going to take Ronald Acuna here with the 12th pick in the draft. Or, later in the first round, you'll see somebody take, or early in the second round, you'll start to see like these prospects start to go because people are saying, I want to be great for 10 years, even if I'm not going to be very good for the next 2 or 3 years. So we did this, earlier this winter. And, one of the guys I keep coming back to, in part because I'm obsessed with the Mets, is Brandon Nimmo. Brandon Nimmo was their first-round pick in 2011 out of Wyoming, which is a hotbed for baseball talent, let me tell you. And he's had some injuries. And he slowly progressed through the system, and came up last year, had a good OBP. I really like him as a leadoff guy, especially for a team that doesn't have a lot of leadoff guys. And to kind of bring this to score sheet, Brandon Nimmo isn't going to steal a ton of bases. So in a roto context, he's not as valuable. But in a score sheet context where the OBP matters, where the defensive rating matters, I think he's somebody who I'd be excited about. I think playing time is going to be an issue. I think the natural spot for him was right field, and they signed Jay Bruce. Could I see a Nimmo Lagares platoon to start the year? That seems like a fit. Lagares isn't the center fielder that he once was, and he's always had a fairly large, historically had a large platoon split. I think Nimmo as the big part of a platoon in center could be interesting. And then, of course, Michael Conforto is going to be back sometime in May, and that'll put a squeeze on playing time. But by then, as Bruce gotten hurt, as Cespedes has only played 81 games last year. He's an injury case.
You're talking about the Mets. So if recent history holds, they're going to have plenty of injuries, and playing time will take care of itself. I never have figured out what the deal with some organizations and injuries are, but if I'm an agent and I got a free agent pitcher, I'm not sure I want him going to the Mets, because it seems like, and this has been going on for 30 years, it seems like, that if you pitch for the Mets, your chance of having a major injury is pretty dang high.
Well, they've had trouble keeping even position players healthy, so that's a concern. The problem, of course, is Brandon Nimmo could end up being the guy who gets hurt, and we go from there. But I mean, there's been fluke things too. Like Conforto last year took a swing and suffered a shoulder injury. It was a very fluke injury. So, but they've also had situations where they've last year Noah Syndergaard complained about a problem on a Thursday. They skipped his start. He wouldn't undergo an MRI. He pitched on Sunday and then did in April and didn't pitch again until September. So they've made bad decisions along the way with their guys. I was there the night. I was there with a bunch of score sheet guys, actually, a bunch of guys who were in the first newsletter score sheet league. And four of us were just sitting there watching the game. Noah Syndergaard, the Mets are up 10-0 in the sixth inning. And we think, okay, well, this is a good time to save 40 pitches for Noah Syndergaard. And Terry Collins sends him out there for the seventh, sends him out there for the eighth, sends him out there for the ninth to get the shutout. And he eventually struggled through 116 pitches, didn't get the shutout. I'm not saying that's the reason for any of this. It's just bad management. You're chasing stats. You're chasing a shutout. That's not going to matter. What's going to matter is, hey, we gave our ace who throws 101 miles an hour an easy night. So I don't think they've made good decisions in that realm. I know Steven Matz has had injuries. Some of it, like I say, some of it's the player himself. Steven Matz is just fragile. He didn't pitch well Sunday or Monday, whenever he was last out there. See how that goes. But they haven't helped themselves. And they're one of the interesting teams this year to watch because we know 5 of the 6 division winners. We have a pretty good idea. It's going to be the Yankees or the Red Sox in the East. And then we know 10 teams aren't playing. So there just aren't a whole lot of teams in the middle anymore. The Mets are one of those teams in the middle that could go either way. If their pitching is healthy, they could win over 90 games, more than 90 games. If their pitching is not healthy, they'll finish under 500.
Yeah. No, if their 5 top pitchers, get 140 starts between the 5 of them, they could be one of the best teams of baseball. But that's just hard to imagine. I remember when you guys, back in the early days of Prospectus, when Gary Huckabee was touting the idea there is no such thing as a pitching prospect. And yet people still draft, like you said, in the mock draft or in any fantasy league, these pitchers that are in the minor leagues, people take them high, partly because once they get to the majors, if they do turn into a star, you're never going to get them. Trying to trade for Madison Bumgarner is pretty much impossible.
It's funny, you asked me about players, and I steered it around the teams, and I think that's just where my head is right now because I'm doing all this team stuff. But to mention a couple of other guys, we took Stephen Piscotty in the 10th round of that draft, which was, just to give you an idea, 25 teams, and this would have been around the 230th pick of the draft. Excuse me. I love Piscotty. I think he got mishandled by Matheny in St. Louis. Talk about managers I tend to pick on a lot. And obviously, when they traded for Ozuna, they had to get rid of somebody. They traded both Piscotty and Grichuk, so they're all in on Tommy Pham this year as well. But I think Piscotty in Oakland could really break out. It's a tough ballpark. It's a good homer park. It's a tough park for average because of all the foul territory. But I like Piscotty as somebody who's going to hit 280 with a good OBP, a lot of doubles, maybe 15 to 20 home runs. And he's on this long-term deal that the Cardinals signed him to, so the A's should be able to hold on to him for a while. Another young guy we picked up was Luis Perdomo. He's probably most famous for hitting 2 triples last year. But as a starting pitcher, he was basically a number 4 starter type next year. I think his velocity indicates that he's got some upside over that. I think he can get ground balls. These are pretty deep sleeper types. I mean, Piscotty can play in a mixed league. I think Perdomo and Nimmo are probably more deep league. A lot of score sheet players play in deeper leagues. I know that I've typically played in 10-team AL leagues. I think that's your standard, right? 10 teams for the single league leagues.
AL or only.
Nimmo, Piscotty, and Perdomo are all going to play in those type of leagues. And these are guys you can find, down at. I don't know how much content you read, Jeff, but I always love these articles that are, my sleeper for this year is Christian Yelich. Now that he's in Milwaukee, it's like, come on, man.
Yeah.
I really like this year. I think that Max Scherzer guy has some growth left in him. No, I do tend to dig deep for this stuff, and I think it's interesting because when I first started playing fantasy, everybody played deep leagues. It was all, these 12-team AL Roto leagues or 10-team AL Roto or whatever have you, or strat leagues that had like 24 teams in them, or score sheet like BL Murphy. That was a huge league. I actually drafted in Murphy with Gary Huckabee before we ever started Prospectus, and now it feels like most people, particularly the online revolution, everybody plays in like 10-team mixed leagues on ESPN and Yahoo. And it's like, and nothing, you play whatever you play. I don't mean to sound judgy, but it does make it hard to point out Brandon Nimmo
No, you're right.
Playing in a 10-team Yahoo league. Brandon Nimmo's never even going to show up. Never going to show up on his radar.
No, you're down in the 7th round, and you're still talking about picking a real life number 2 starter. No, I think in score sheet. Well, for one, you have to have innings. So you can't just pick guys that are number 1 or number 2 starters or a closer. You have to have, 162 times 9. That's a lot of innings. 1,500 innings you're going to have pitchers. Now, you can fill them with a lot of relievers these days, but, if they're pitching 50 innings a season, you need an awful lot of them to get up to 1,400 or 1,500 innings. And especially, I think teams like the A's that aren't as well known, there's a lot of baseball fans that can name all 25 guys, or at least 20 of them on the Yankees or the Dodgers or the Cubs. But the person that knows who the 18th best player is on the A's and knows to draft him because he's going to get 400 at-bats as a 4th outfielder definitely has a leg up.
Well, particularly when it comes to the starts. And when you're drafting early, and all these score sheet drafts are happening right now, and you have to project a little bit, and being able to nail those mid and late round guys, not even just performance, but as you say, the guys who are going to get 28 starts, being able to suss out the back end of that A's rotation. Is it going to be Daniel Mengden? Is it going to be Andrew Triggs getting the starts? I mean, that's a lot of the value, and that's a lot of the fun of it. I mean, getting those guys right. I mean, we all want to hit on our 1st and 2nd round and 3rd round draft picks, but I think that I get a lot of pleasure, a lot of fun out of in that 25th round of a draft, identifying the guy who turns out to be really good. I took 2 years ago, I got Adam Duvall in like the 34th round of a score sheet draft, and he had the big year in 2016. That feels great. I mean, when you nail a guy like that, win or lose the league, you get a little bit of bragging rights with your friends, and I think that's, I mean, to the extent that I play, I mean, I kind of try to play with people I know, so you can always have those discussions. I mentioned I did Nando's radio show the other day, and he and I went back and forth about Avisail Garcia 2 years ago, I guess, while he was in his draft. I was telling him to take it was an Angels pitcher who I can't remember right now, who ended up being nothing. But he wanted to take Avisail Garcia, and I'm like, no, he's not going to be anything. And of course, Garcia blew up last year, so that's kind of always going to be a thing between us. The Avisail Garcia thing. It's like you always have. Randy Gisarelli and I go back 25 years. We had a knockdown drag out over Joey Hamilton for the people, and there are people listening right now. Who the heck is Joey Hamilton? He's a right-handed starter who was supposed to be a really good pitcher with the Padres and never really panned out. You end up with this backlog and this bank of history with your friends of players you can joke about and have fun about. And I have enormous respect for all the people in this industry who dig in deep on the numbers. You think about Mike Podhorzer in his book, and the Joe Pisapia book, the Fantasy Black book. All the incredible work these guys are putting in to try to identify the best players and make the best projections. But for me, it's about sitting around the draft table or in a chat room and drafting your team and throwing jokes at each other and making references that go back 6 or 7 years and having that 6 hours. To me, the draft is 80 to 90% of the value of a league.
Yeah, no, the draft is. I mean, we've got to play the games because you want to see how your draft turns out. But we have, thanks to the online, we don't have nearly the live drafts we used to.
Mm-hmm.
Though at least in a web draft there's a chat room aspect. So in some sense, you have almost more conversation because our drafts are slow. Most of our drafts last for 6 or 8 weeks. Over 6 or 8 weeks, you can make a lot of comments to your fellow league members in an online chat room.
I was going to say the mock draft is just a great read. Just literally reading the mock draft page and seeing all the commentary on the picks, because it's designed as an exercise for that. And it's a bunch of people who've been doing this for years. So you kind of have a little bit of history and kind of go back and forth. There's not a lot of ribbing. We don't know each other that well, but the analysis and the commentary on the picks is fantastic. And, score sheet leagues that even do the online, because of that element of it, you can have that level of interaction, and that grows a league. Interaction is what grows a league and what makes a league strong. And, sometimes the leagues last 1 year and you go on and do your next thing. But the best part of fantasy is, like I say, drafting with your friends over a period of time.
Yeah, or people that become friends,
Exactly.
I really like it when someone calls me with a question or whatever, change their address, and somehow during the conversation they say, oh, yeah, I went to a Phillies game with Joe Smith the other day, and, 10 years ago I didn't know Joe Smith, and we were in a score sheet league together, and now we're best friends. Because they've been in the same score sheet league for 10 years. They finally hook up at a ball game, and now, they go to dinner with each other or whatever. I always like it when I hear stories like that.
I got into B.L. Murphy because of Gary Huckabee, and a few years after that, we started this company, and now I've got basically a baseball career because of because Score Sheet put me in touch with Gary Huckabee. So you really do get great stories, and I've got strat stories going back 25 years. It's the same thing. It's a group of people who enjoy playing a game, and it turns out they become friends. At Chandler Fest every year, First Pitch Arizona, that's probably the largest concentration of Score Sheet players I come into contact with. And you hear a lot of those stories too. Like, these guys they see each other once a year at this event. They're in a league and they only see each other, at the thing, but they played in the Score Sheet league going back 20 years. So, I think about, Ron Chandler with Baseball HQ and you with Score Sheet. And I guess I got to put myself and the Prospectus guys in here. Guys have been doing this type of material or in the fantasy baseball world for 20 to 25 years. It's just, I don't think any of us thought in the late 80s and early 90s it was going to end up like this. But it's really fascinating to see how long some of these companies have been able to last.
Yeah, no, I've been interacting with you and Ron Chandler and guys like that. This is our 31st year. And you look back on it once in a while, I go, yeah, I've known that guy for a while. And then you look back, you realize, wow, it was 1992 when I first started talking to him. And, I guess we're not getting younger.
No.
Yeah, it's good. Well, folks, once again, if you like good writing, especially about baseball, because there's a lot of people in the fantasy industry they're fantasy players, but they're almost not baseball fans. They don't even have a favorite team or, they probably were baseball fans, but they're more now about players and stats. Joe definitely keeps it, he writes about baseball. And then fantasy is part of baseball, so he writes about fantasy. But I really cannot recommend the newsletter enough. I think, with discounts and all, it's more like $2 a month. $2 doesn't go very far these days. Plus, you'd be supporting a great guy. So once again, they can go on Facebook and go to Sheehan Newsletter on Facebook.
Sheehan Newsletter on Facebook. You can get a 10% discount by using the link at Facebook. You can also, if you want to see some longer excerpts, check out joesheehanbaseball.blogspot.com. joesheehanbaseball.blogspot.com. I set that up once so I could put up just free things for people to link to. I think right now the Mike Messina Hall of Fame piece is up there if people want to look at that.
Right. And also, Joe Sheehan, that's Sheehan, is not the most common name in America. So if you just Google search Joe Sheehan Baseball, you'll find some links to his stuff. It's really good. And you and I both missed Phoenix for different reasons this fall, but hopefully next fall we will both be there and we'll get to visit some in person.
I'm looking forward to that. I missed that last year. I actually didn't realize you hadn't gone, Jeff. So let's get down there next year and have fun down there.
All right. Thanks for talking, Joe.
Hey, thanks for having me.